the algorithm of token bucket algorithm. In this algorithm, we solve the rate limiter problem. What is the rate limiter problem? The rate limiter problem is a problem where a request arrives to us and we need to decide whether we can serve the request or throttle it. We do know whether we allow this request to come into our system or we do not allow this request to come to our system. So how do we decide whether to allow this request or not to allow this request based on the traffic, based on how much traffic our servers could serve? Throttling. The token bucket algorithm says that we have a bucket with a number of tokens. So let's say that we have a bucket with a maximum of 20 tokens. Each request that comes needs to say, hey, can you allow this request? And this request requires 1 token. So of course, if we now have 21 tokens in the bucket, and this request needs 1 token, then after this request is served, we would have 20 tokens, 21 minus 1. So it's perfectly fine. But if a request comes and it says, I need 30 tokens in order to serve this request, then we cannot serve it. If we have 0 tokens in the bucket and the request comes and it says, I need 1 token in order to serve this request, then we cannot serve it. So the token bucket algorithm says that each second we know that requests are being removed from the server because the server is constantly handling requests. So each second the bucket is filled up, but we do not need to have a process that each second would fill up the bucket with tokens such that new request would come and ask us, can I be served? Because we can do this calculation only when a request comes. So when a request comes, and we need to know whether to allow this request or to throttle it, then we can immediately first, before we decide whether the request can be fulfilled or not, we can first refill the bucket. So we said the last request was 2 seconds ago. And I know that the refill rate for this bucket, that this server can add 2 tokens per second. So because 2 seconds has passed since the last request to this server, then I can add 4 tokens to this bucket. So if the bucket originally had 6 tokens, then I can add 4 tokens to the bucket before I even consider this new request. But of course, if we said that the maximum allowed number of tokens for this bucket is 8, and 4 plus 4 is going to be 8, but if my calculation said that we can add 6 tokens to the bucket and it had 4, then this would be 10. But if we have a maximum for this bucket, we limit it by the minimum of the current number of tokens that the bucket already has, plus the additional ones that we want to refill it with, and the max, the cap of this bucket. So we need to remember the last time step that the request came, that we refill this bucket, and the current timestamp, such that we can calculate how many seconds passed, or sub-seconds, and refill the bucket. Now, when the request comes, it's going to be simple. We are simply going to ask, is the bucket having enough tokens to serve this request? So when a request comes, if it needs 2 tokens, then we can check whether the bucket has 2 tokens or more. If it has 2 tokens or more, then we can serve this request. So we just do an if the cost of this request plus the current bucket size, the current number of tokens in this bucket is less than the maximum allowed tokens in this bucket, then yes, return true, this request can be served and increase the current number of tokens that the bucket already served by the cost of this request. Else, do not increase the number of tokens in this bucket and throttle this request. So let's repeat. A request comes, we do a refill. Based on the number of seconds that passed since the last refill, we refill the token with newly freshed buckets. Based on the number of seconds that passed since the latest refill and the refill rate per second. And then we just check for the new request if the cost of it plus the current bucket size is less than the maximum size of this bucket, less equal than the maximum size that this bucket can contain. If yes, then increase the current bucket size, return true, meaning allow this request, else false, and do not increase this bucket size.